Burkina Faso has done the unthinkable. A desert country, often dismissed by global powers, has just completed a 100-kilometer canal dug by hand, financed without a single coin from the International Monetary Fund, the United States Agency for International Development, or the European Union. No foreign consultants, no press conferences, no debt agreements, only shovels, sweat, and an audacious belief that Africa can build for itself. While global headlines stayed silent, the earth beneath the Sahel moved, and the people felt it. This is not just a canal. It is a question carved into the sand. What happens when Africans stop begging and start building? What if aid is not development but dependency disguised as generosity? What if the maps drawn in Paris, Brussels, and Washington were never meant for Africans to follow but for Africans to obey? Have you ever felt your heart break and your eyes fill with tears as you watched our homeland Africa cracked and forgotten? Have you seen children with no shirts on their backs, forced to scoop dirty water to drink, their stomachs empty and their eyes sunken from hunger? Our parents work tirelessly, day after day, yet never sit down to a full meal. We have suffered for far too long. Now is the time for us, the children of this continent, to rise. Not with anger, but with strength, unity, and courage. Share this video so our voices can echo across the world. Let God witness our bravery. Let the world stop looking down on Africa. Share this video for a self-reliant and prosperous Africa. Comment where you are watching from so we know Africa is not forgotten. Like and subscribe to support the rise of a stronger, freer, and prouder Africa. At the center of this silent storm stands a 36-year-old soldier turned head of state. His name is Ibrahim Traore. To some, he is a radical. To others, a traitor to the old order. But to his people, he may be something far more powerful, a reminder that dignity is not given, it is claimed. This is not merely an engineering project. It is an act of rebellion. It is a prayer, answered with action. It is a shovel of defiance, thrown into the face of a system that said Africans could not rise without a signature from overseas. And so we ask you, the viewer, what does it mean to be free in a world ruled by debt? What would you tell your children if your country chose to build instead of borrow? Stay with us, because this story is not about Burkina Faso alone. It is about every African nation that dares to believe again. For over 4 decades, Burkina Faso has been showcased as a model recipient of international aid. From the early 1980s, every crisis, whether a drought, a famine, or an economic downturn, was met with a rescue package from the International Monetary Fund, the United States Agency for International Development, or the European Union. At first glance, these interventions appeared generous, but beneath the surface, they began to reshape the soul of a nation. Every grant came with conditions: cuts in public spending, privatization of essential services, the dismantling of local cooperatives, the flooding of markets with cheap, subsidized grains from Europe. Farmers who once grew their own rice and millet were forced to abandon their fields. They watched their crops rot while imported wheat filled warehouses. Children were fed high-energy biscuits, while their mothers had no ingredients left to cook their traditional meals. The fields became quiet. The soil, once rich with community, grew barren under foreign formulas. On paper, development was progressing. Bridges were built, schools were painted, irrigation maps were drawn. But each of these projects carried a small plaque, funded by the European Union, or supported by US aid. And behind those plaques were contracts that handed over decision-making power to international advisors. Contracts that bound Burkina Faso to plans it did not write. Young graduates, eager to serve their country, were told that no project could proceed without foreign technical approval. Farmers who once decided what to plant and when, now queued for foreign-designed seeds and imported fertilizers promised to yield more, but costing them their autonomy. The result? A country rich in land and culture became dependent on permission to survive. In the capital city of Ouagadougou, this reality birthed a quiet rebellion. Students began hanging handwritten banners on campus gates: "We do not need imported development." Across villages, women gathered to cook meals, using only local rice. Volunteer engineers formed groups to revive ancestral agricultural practices. These were not political parties. They were movements of memory. They were signs that a nation was awakening. And yet, the previous governments continued to speak the language of donors. They held press conferences in English and French about inclusive growth and sustainability indicators, while mothers begged for clean water and children walked kilometers just to fetch a single bucket. This was not development. This was dependency dressed in diplomatic language. The gap widened. Above, a government trapped in a cycle of debt and foreign obligation. Below, a people yearning for dignity, for ownership, for control over their own future. Hunger became more than a lack of food. It became a hunger for sovereignty, for self-respect. Imagine Amina, a 15-year-old girl in rural Burkina Faso. Every day, before the sun rises, she walks 4 kilometers to a dried-up well, hoping to find enough water for her family. Her classroom has a chalkboard that reads, "Water is life." But in her heart, she wonders, whose water, whose life? When her teacher asks, "How will you change your country?" she writes, "By believing in ourselves again." This is not just her story. It is the story of millions, a generation raised between two worlds. On one side, they are told that aid is a gift. On the other, they see their fathers lose land, their mothers lose fields, and their dreams replaced by packaged solutions that never truly fit. In recent years, video clips began circulating online. In one, a French aid truck unloads clean water in a village near the capital. Just a few kilometers away, another village remains untouched, parched, silent. The contrast is unbearable, and people began to ask, why do we wait for permission to live? This growing disillusionment did not erupt overnight. It built slowly, like pressure beneath cracked earth. A silent storm was gathering. And then, a soldier picked up a shovel. He did not shout slogans. He did not launch campaigns. He dug. In April 2024, the air in Burkina Faso shifted, not because of an election, a protest, or a headline, but because of a decree. A single sheet of paper, signed by Captain Ibrahim Traore, declared that construction would begin on a 96-kilometer canal across the arid regions of Kugri and Mokedo. No ceremony, no foreign delegates, no grand unveiling on television, just a command. And then, the digging began. This project had been buried for over a decade, rejected time and again by international donors, labeled financially unrealistic, ecologically risky, and incompatible with the criteria set by global institutions. Yet, for Traore, the question was never whether the project fit their rules. The question was, did it fit the dreams of his people? He turned the tables. Instead of pleading for grants, he redirected military funds once used to buy foreign equipment. Instead of importing engineers, he mobilized local talent students from hydraulic institutes, volunteer militias, and veterans who still remembered how to work the land. Single mothers carried shovels. Retired teachers measured soil depth. Young men and women formed human chains, passing tools, building embankments, guiding the flow. There were no consultants flown in from Geneva, no glossy PowerPoint presentations, no feasibility reports stamped by the African Development Bank. There were only hands, calloused, determined hands. In just 127 days, the impossible became visible. Water began to move, slowly at first, then with purpose. It glistened under the sun, slicing through the cracked earth like a silver promise. Farmers dropped to their knees, some in prayer, others in disbelief. Elders whispered, "It has been so long since we saw living land." The canal did not just carry water, it carried something deeper: hope. For the first time in decades, entire regions that had been forgotten by development maps began to stir. Smallholder farmers returned to their fields. Students rewrote their final papers to study this new model of community-led infrastructure. At local markets, vendors began to say, "If they dig canals, we can replant." The spirit spread like wildfire. Families traveled from distant provinces to see the miracle with their own eyes. They brought their children, not to a museum, but to a living testament that change was possible with bare hands and an unshakable will. Traore did not stand apart. He worked alongside them. He did not wear polished boots or speak from balconies. He stood barefoot in the dirt, held a hoe, and said, "We will do it ourselves. No borrowing, no begging, no bowing." Local radio stations stopped replaying international news. Instead, they broadcast poetry written by canal diggers. One line echoed everywhere. "Water flows, sweat falls. A parched country begins to grow." Internationally, this success was met with a strange silence. No congratulations, no technical reviews, no press coverage. Major outlets that once analyzed every decision made by Burkina Faso now avoided mentioning its greatest project in decades. Even agencies that had previously rejected the canal on environmental grounds chose not to acknowledge its successful construction. But the people did not need validation. They had water. They had each other. They had a canal carved not from debt, but from dignity. Children in local schools wrote essays titled, "If I were an engineer, I would build more canals." Grandmothers planted rice near the edges of the new channel. Community leaders discussed forming cooperatives, this time not because a foreign advisor told them to, but because it was their idea. The project began to reshape the national imagination. It was no longer about what Burkina Faso lacked. It was about what it had, its people, its courage, and its land. The canal became a mirror. In it, the country saw not just its reflection, but its rebirth. It proved something powerful: Africa does not need permission to develop. It needs belief. Not belief from the outside, but from within. And so, this canal is not just a line in the earth. It is a line in history. A line that separates the era of dependency from a new era of determination. As the first streams of water flowed through the Kugri Canal, Burkina Faso celebrated, but outside its borders, silence fell. Western news outlets, usually quick to report on African development, avoided the story. No features in major newspapers, no debates on global economic panels, no technical analysis from international think tanks. The canal was invisible to the world, intentionally so. Then came the shift. A few weeks later, headlines began to appear, almost simultaneously, across multiple Western platforms. They did not praise the project. Instead, they raised suspicion. The financial origins of the Burkina Canal remain a mystery. Is Traore trading gold for power, self-reliance, or mass manipulation? Suddenly, what had been dismissed as an impossible project was now portrayed as dangerous. Aid organizations that had previously called the canal ecologically unfeasible now warned of its environmental risks. Human rights groups raised alarms about the working conditions of the thousands of volunteers. A new academic term emerged in published journals: authoritarian localism. The accusations were not frontal attacks. They were whispers designed to sow doubt. Was Traore building infrastructure or building a new dictatorship under the banner of independence? The consequences followed quickly. A scheduled education aid package from the European Union was delayed without formal explanation. A German engineering delegation cancelled its upcoming visit to assess solar power potential. Most notably, the International Monetary Fund suspended debt restructuring talks worth $120 million. There was no press release, only a leak. "They do not want to set a dangerous example," one anonymous official said. "If Burkina can do it, so can Mali, Niger, Senegal." Veiled warnings began to arrive through diplomatic backchannels. Traore, once seen as an ambitious reformer, was now labeled a regional disruptor. A London-based non-profit launched an investigation, alleging that gold from the national mines had been funneled into the canal project without competitive bidding. French media ran documentaries calling the project water fever, claiming Burkina's people were being used for propaganda. Even at the African Union, murmurs spread about Burkina Faso's lack of cooperation with international norms. Public opinion became divided. Some hailed Traore as a visionary who did what no one else dared. Others feared he was dragging the country into isolation. But through it all, Traore remained largely silent. He continued to build, not just canals, but a new idea, one that the global system could not easily contain, because it was never just about water. It was about rewriting the script. A small nation challenging the architecture of global aid, not with guns or speeches, but with shovels. And for those invested in the old order, that was the most dangerous act of all. As the backlash intensified, many expected Burkina Faso to retreat, to soften its stance and seek compromise. But instead of bending, the Traore government moved in the opposite direction. They doubled down on their path to self-reliance. Rather than appeal to the very institutions that were freezing aid and delaying talks, Traore reached out to neighbors, Mali, Niger, and Guinea. These were not just nearby countries. They were nations undergoing similar shifts, led by movements that questioned the traditional donor-recipient relationship with the West. In July 2024, delegations from the four countries met quietly. The result was the first ever Triangle Summit, held in the heart of Ouagadougou. There were no suits from Washington, no oversight from Brussels. Instead, engineers, ministers, and grassroots leaders gathered to envision a different kind of integration. The outcome was transformative. Together, they announced a cross-border infrastructure PACTA plan to create a network of irrigation systems across national boundaries. These would be funded not by foreign banks, but by pooled reserves from Sahelian nations. A new term was born in the final communiqué: regional self-reliance. They also launched the African Agricultural Development Fund, an initiative led by indigenous engineers and local cooperatives, focused on reviving ancestral farming techniques and building sustainable food systems without foreign dependency. At the summit, Ibrahim Traore delivered the keynote address titled, "When Water Becomes an Ideological Border." He did not present statistics. He spoke of dignity. "We used to live on borrowed money," he said, "but we cannot teach our children that begging is a sustainable way of life. We must build not only canals, but courage." Following the summit, Burkina Faso began training local journalists to document their own story. A wave of social media, counseled not by government offices, but by everyday citizens, emerged under names like "Africa digs canals, not debts." They posted images of rice fields, community water tanks, and children planting seeds. The resistance was no longer only political. It was cultural, it was regional, it was rising. And this time, Africa was writing its own narrative. This story began with a canal, a channel of water carved through dry land. But it ends with something far greater: a change in how a nation sees itself. The Kugri Canal is no longer just a trench filled with water. It is a mirror, reflecting the soul of Burkina Faso, a soul that once knelt before global lenders now stands upright. A people once trained to wait now choose to act. Across the countryside, the results are visible. For the first time in over 20 years, the fields around the Kugri region are green again. Crops sway gently in the breeze. Farmers have returned to their land, not as laborers for foreign programs, but as owners of their future. In the suburbs, unemployment has fallen. Villagers are forming cooperatives, not because they were told to, but because they believe in building something together. In schools, students no longer study only Western models. They ask different questions now. How did we do this? How can we do more? Children write essays that begin with the words, "If I were an engineer, I would dig hope into the land." This transformation cannot be measured in charts or dollar signs. It is measured in dignity, in pride, in the quiet confidence of a mother who knows her child will eat today, in the smile of a teacher who no longer has to teach hunger alongside history. But even as Burkina Faso rises, the world grows uneasy. Because if one of the poorest countries in Africa can succeed without aid, then every development plan written by international agencies must be questioned. And that is why the real battle is only beginning. Not with bullets, but with doubt. Not in war rooms, but in minds. The world does not need to launch a coup to stop this movement. It only needs to make the people doubt the man who brought them water, to replace belief with suspicion. But Traore understands this. That is why he does not rely on speeches. He relies on action. Today, across Burkina Faso, local voices grow louder. They say, "We do not need handouts. We need our hands in the soil." They say, "Africa digs canals, not debts." They say, "We are not waiting anymore." If you are a young African leader watching this, ask yourself, will you continue signing plans written in foreign boardrooms? Or will you stand beside your people, shovels in hand, digging a canal of freedom? If you are a father, a student, a mother, or a believer, ask yourself, what legacy will you leave behind? Will it be a debt agreement, or a channel that gives life? Share this video, share this story. Let it echo across every village and city, not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa, because we are not broken, we are rising, we are not begging, we are building, and in the cracked earth of our past, something new is growing. My name is Samuel Ngugi. I am from Nakuru, Kenya. I grew up watching my father carry water for our small garden, while we waited for rain, for help, for change. But after seeing what Burkina Faso has done, I no longer want to wait. I want to act. The canal they dug is more than water. It is a sign. It says we do not need permission to live with dignity. It says Africa can build with its own hands. That is Africa rising. I dream of a new Africa where we do not rely on foreign aid, but rely on each other. A continent where our children write essays about building, not begging. Where leaders believe in their people, not in donors. I want a future where we dig canals, not debt. Burkina Faso has shown the way. They work together, young, old, soldiers, mothers, and they prove that unity is strength. They have inspired us all. That is the spirit of Africa reborn. Let us follow their example. Let us rise as one people, with one purpose. Let us teach our children that the future is built, not borrowed. This is not just about one nation. This is about all of us. This is Africa rising. This is Africa reborn. And it begins now.